This meeting is hosted by Northampton's Housing Partnership and City Council Committee on Community Resources. We have invited housing developers and professionals who will discuss data, statewide initiatives, current trends in the housing market that are contributing to the high cost of construction, from financing to regulatory and energy requirements, and creating impediments to getting housing built. We will look at what implications that has for affordability in Northampton and beyond. This meeting is being recorded. The Northampton Housing Partnership supports the development of housing in the city of Northampton, and we meet on the first Monday of every month. I don't think so. Nobody's here.
Do you have So Gwen Nabad, Chair of Northampton Housing Partnership, and me, Debbie Pastich-Clemmer, Chair of Community Resources. Welcome everybody to the meeting tonight. And our Carolyn Meesh, Director of Northampton Office of Planning and Sustainability, will give an overview of the forum and introduction of guest speakers.
Okay. Oh, this is you.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, sorry.
So good afternoon. Thank you all for coming on Zoom and in person. We're just gonna, I put the agenda up, and as Councilor Clemmer and Gwen Ahmad noted, that we want to talk about housing in detail and sort of what's affecting housing in the market in Northampton. We know there's been a lot of questions about that. So we've got 3 panelists here to talk about that. We're still expecting our third one to show, but he is the last one, so I imagine he'll be walking in here shortly. But before we sort of, before we get to that, I just want to give you more detailed overview of sort of what we know and what the data is saying. And these professionals are going to get into the details from their perspective about issues that are occurring in the housing market, and the differences between subsidized affordable housing and market rate housing, and what we can do together as a community to address those. So just background information. You all may have read a report that was done by the Donahue Institute in 2021-ish, executed by Wayfinders. They had hired Donahue to do this study. There's been an updated study that they are just releasing now and rolling out around the western part of Massachusetts. So there are a couple of data points I just want to put out here that are from that new updated study. As everyone, I think, has seen, construction costs have significantly risen since 2019 and all right along. We have an aging population of 65 and older is rising, which has implications for the type of housing that's going to be demanded. And those needs may include accessibility features, smaller units with lower maintenance. We know that supply continues to be dropping below what the demand is out there. Owner vacancy rates are very low and sort of evaluated to be lower than what's considered healthy. And that also translates to rental vacancy rates, which are rising or are dropping significantly and affecting the housing market as well. And this housing study also indicates that about 23% of residents are cost burden, which means they're paying more than 30% of their income for housing. And what we know in these numbers, what I'm taking, this report covers all of Western Mass, so Hampshire, Hampden, Franklin, Berkshire, but I've picked out some pieces of this data that are focused really on Hampshire County. So these numbers are really extracted for that. And so we know that there's a need across all income levels. And I think these folks are going to talk about that and about how it's not just affordable housing or even workforce housing, but we need housing sort of at all levels. And that's affecting the price of housing or the cost of housing for everyone. So I wanted to just sort of set the stage. This is what's sort of bringing us here to talk about this, because there's a lot of information or misunderstanding about why things cost so much, or why people can't get into the market and are struggling both on the renter side as well as the ownership side. And so we thought that it would be just a valuable opportunity to converse about it and ask questions and give more data. So the first person we have up is Alexis Breitnecker from Valley Community Development. And I will let each of the speakers talk a little bit about themselves and their experience, and then launch into what you'd like to discuss. So I'm going to hand it over to Alexis. You put.
Okay. Hi, everybody. So I am Alexis and I'm Executive Director of Valley Community Development. Your agenda says that Jess Allen is going to be here. I am not Jess Allen. She's actually far more proficient at this than I am, but she is very sick. So I'm not going to spare her. I'm sparing her from this. So Valley Community Development is a community development corporation. We've been in Northampton for almost 40 years. We've developed over 400 units of affordable housing. We only do affordable housing. We do not do market rate housing. And we have two other areas of work we do besides affordable housing, just so folks know the spectrum of work we do. We support first-time homebuyers and we support small businesses. We are based in Northampton, but we work in all three counties, Hampden, Hampshire, and Franklin counties. And what I'm going to talk a little bit about is a common question we get is why it costs so much money to build affordable housing. And it is very complicated. And Jess tried to make it as simple as possible. I have our dear friend Lionel Romaine in the back, who did this for decades before I even entered the scene. And I promised Lionel can fact check me if I get something wrong. So don't be afraid to correct me. Yeah, of course. Not to put you on the spot, Lionel. So there's a whole bunch of different sources that any affordable housing developer uses when they are building affordable housing. And this graphic that Jess did is actually wildly accurate. So we, as an affordable housing developer, rely on a bunch of different sources. We use municipal funds when they're available. So in communities like Northampton, Community Preservation Act funding is very critical as first in money to a deal. We borrow money that has interest rates. We use state money, and then we use federal and state low-income housing tax credits. And the depiction here of like how much each one of those things actually fills is pretty accurate. So for example, folks may know that Valley is redeveloping the former nursing home on Bridge Road. It was vacant for 13 years or something. It was in really bad shape. We did a gut rehab. It's almost done. That is a $30 million development. We got $1 million from the city of Northampton out of that 30 million. And that's massive. Like that is the most money we've ever gotten from Northampton to do a deal, but that is a 30th of the cost. So in that case, that's pretty normal. And that's pretty regular for us and how we structure deals, because municipalities, particularly in Western Mass, don't have that much money. They have a lot of people coming to them and asking them for money. And they just can't, we could never get $30 million out of a municipality. That's crazy town. I see you shaking your head. Yes, doesn't make sense. All right, Carolyn, the next slide would be great. And then, so what's it paying for, right? So generally, not always, we have to buy the thing. So in some cases, like we are going to be doing Crafts Avenue, which is just right down there. It was a city-owned lot and the city is giving it to us for $1. That is uncommon for us. Frequently, we are buying from a third party. In the case of the nursing home, somebody had already purchased it through auction and we had to buy it from them. That was a $2.3 million actual acquisition cost. So we pay for things. Then we have to build the things. So the construction and the construction loan that we have to take is a big chunk of what that money goes towards. The soft costs in there are attorneys and all the things that come with structuring an affordable housing deal. We are also required by the state, when we borrow money from the state, to set aside reserves. So 10 years after the building is built and people are living there and something goes dramatically wrong with the elevator, or, I don't know, something happens with the roof, or something goes bad with the HVAC system, we have to have money set aside because the state doesn't want us coming back to them, or the state doesn't want people who are living there to have problems. So in the example of, what am I think? We did a development in Amherst, East Gables, right next to Amherst College. We had to set aside $250,000 for capitalized reserves. That's not uncommon for us. We also have supportive services reserves that we often put in. So it's a small part, but it is a very critical part. And then we pay ourselves. So even though we're a nonprofit, the way affordable housing development works is that there's no money to pay our staff to do the work until construction starts. So you'll see actually on the next slide, I think, Carolyn, maybe not. Not yet, but I'm going to talk about it anyhow, that sometimes it can take us 5 years before we even get to construction. So for those 5 years, we are paying staff to do all of the work involved in getting those deals to fruition, and there's no source of income. So the way we get income to pay the real estate staff who are doing this really specialized, really critical work is that we take a fee when a building is built. And it's very complicated how that's structured. There's some tax pieces involved in it, and the money doesn't all come in one lump sum, but it is a piece of the total. But the biggest piece truly is construction. Yes. All right, so this is the thing that people always want to talk about, is what it costs. So I will say that developing in Western Mass is less expensive than developing in Boston, but we're getting close. So when I talk to my CDC colleagues in the Boston area, they typically are looking at almost $1 million per unit. Because it's more complicated, things cost more, like all of the pieces. In Western Mass, we're like $350 to $750, and it sort of depends on what we're building. So I'm trying to think. Our estimates right now for Crafts Avenue, I can't do per unit, but it's about $650 a square foot, which is pretty high. I'm looking at Jonathan because he knows what I'm talking about. A square foot, yes. And I think we're coming in at a per unit cost of around 6-something, 610, 620, something like that. Smaller is
20,000.
correct.
Not just 600.
Correct. Yes. So when we have more space and it's slightly less complicated, like we're doing a homeownership deal in Amherst, those are duplexes that we have plenty of space. The site isn't challenging. We are not constrained because it's ownership versus rental by a lot of different policies that regulate what things look like. Those are coming in closer to the $350,000 a unit, $450,000 unit, something like that. When we are doing rental and when we are working in municipalities like wonderful Northampton that have adopted stretch code, our environmental regulations really increase, which is awesome in the long run because we really support energy efficiency and we don't want to be contributing to climate change. But in the short term, it makes everything more expensive. All right, so this just basically runs through what I just talked about, that we are heavily regulated. In some deals, just talking about the structure, there's like 7 attorneys on the call and we are paying for all 7 attorneys. And depending on the attorney, sometimes they're charging $1,000 an hour. So it feels absurd. As somebody who went to public school, it feels even more absurd, but it is how it is designed. And until the state changes it, we can't buck the system. And as I mentioned, there's very high standards from the Executive Office of Housing and Livable Communities, that EOHLC acronym up there. They govern all the affordable housing in the state of Massachusetts. So we have accessibility standards for people in wheelchairs. We have accessibility standards for people who just need visitability. They need to be able to come into a unit. There's green enterprise and passive house, which are both environmental standards. There's regulations around how big bathrooms can be and how high windowsills can be and how big or not big doorways can be. It's very heavily regulated. So all the architectural plans and the civil engineer, they all need to be reviewed multiple times and the state has to sign off on everything. It just makes it more expensive. As we all know, construction costs have continued to go up. We have to hire specialized consultants because as my entire staff is 10 people, we do not have that expertise in-house for a lot of things. And we're having to layer deals. So again, the nursing home, $30 million project, we had 19 different sources that we used, and each one of those sources had its own set of regulations that we had to deal with. So it is just wildly complicated. And I've already said this too, the working with municipalities is incredibly important to us. Even though it's a small percentage, the state likes to see skin in the game, even though I hate that term so much. When we don't have municipal money, the state is wondering what we're doing wrong. Like, why can't you get money out of a municipality? Does it mean they don't support you? Does it mean you don't have a good job? Are you not like, do you not have the connections? Does the municipality not support affordable housing? So Northampton has been a critical partner for us. And in every development we've done, we've gotten CPA funding, which is awesome. And it is still a small drop in the bucket compared to the total cost of things. And as I mentioned earlier, it takes us a really long time. We wish we could do it faster. One of the big pieces for us is that there's only one funding cycle a year through the state to ask for money. And if we don't get funded, we have to wait another year. You can submit 2 projects at a time, but you're not going to get funded for 2 projects at a time. So even with Alana's our architect that we're planning on using for 33 King, and even that part of our timeline built out is because we have other projects before that. And I would love to be able to go to the state and say, we have 5 ready to go, fund us. And they would laugh in my face right now. And not just us, anybody. But there's a backup at the state with availability of money. There's a backup with, people even able to review applications at the state. So it is not, in part, it's our own capacity. We couldn't do 5 projects right now. But it truly is the funding and the backup at the state level and just the amount of money they have. Talked about this already, longer process. All right. I think that might be it. Oh, yes. I don't know that I need to get into zoning right now. Do you want me to talk about zoning?
We can come back to it at the end.
Let's do that. Yeah. Okay.
Thanks, Alexis.
I talk really fast, so I apologize, but there'll be plenty of time to ask questions later.
So Alon Tierney is next to talk about a different side of the equation. So take it away. Thanks.
Sure. Hi, everybody. I'm Elon Tierney. I'm president of Kuhn Riddle Architects and Designers in Amherst, Massachusetts. I am a Northampton resident. I spent a lot of time in this building on the Central Business Architecture Committee. So Northampton is important to me, and but housing throughout the valley and Western Massachusetts is also important. We do a lot of different work at Kuhn Riddle. Probably about 50% of our work is housing, multifamily housing, single family housing, market rate, affordable, high end. And then we do a lot of work with the colleges and universities. That's probably another almost 50%. And then there's some scattering of commercial projects throughout. So this question is really just what was brought to us. Why does it cost so much? We heard a lot about why it costs so much for affordable housing. I'm going to talk about both private and sort of public or affordable housing developers. This is a project in Gardner, Massachusetts. I'm going to run through 6 projects. 3 of them are considered affordable and 3 of them are considered market rate. I'll let you decide which ones you think they are. This is a project that we started design work in 2007. The construction was completed in 2010. It's the Northeast Veterans Center in Gardner, Massachusetts. It's a collaboration with Mount Wachusett Community College to provide housing, education, and therapy to veterans of Iraq and Afghanistan. It's 20 modular units. All the units are accessible because most of the veterans had some sort of physical impairment. It was the first time that I've done that type of modular building, where it's sort of these townhomes stacked on top of each other. So in 2010, when it was completed, it was 20 homes. Each home is stacked unit. And the total construction cost just for the homes, not the community center, was about $4 million. And so each home was about $200,000. That seems really attractive now. It also had all ground source heat pumps, all solar. It was a pretty impressive project. It got LEED Gold. Yeah, next. This is Olympia Oaks, which some of you may have seen in the paper recently. Sadly, one of the buildings suffered a fire. But we started, well, the timeline, we started design in 2010. We completed construction in 2014. It's 42 homes. I think it says 8.8 million. There was a small community building associated with that, but that cost gets spread out. This does include site development costs. It was a formerly wooded site, so it was all new infrastructure. And back then the cost $210,000 per unit. Bargain. It was painful at the time, is what I will say. We value engineered that project down. Cottage Square, East Hampton, Massachusetts, one of the mill buildings, a conversion, started in 2010, completed in 2014. I think it's 50 apartments, $12 million total construction. So each home was about 240,000. These are beautiful loft style apartments looking out over, what is that body of water in town? Yes, thank you. It has a bridge over to that, to Cottage Street. It's a fabulous place to live. This next one is East Street Commons in Hadley, Massachusetts. It's over 55 housing. This took forever, but it was not an affordable housing developer. It was just that every single home had a base design, and as people purchased them, they were built. So we started in 2008 with the designs. The final house was completed in 2024. It's 32 homes. And so average sale, because with a private developer, we don't always know what the costs are for construction, but the sales kind of early on were around 400, and I think towards the end they're around 650. This is familiar to someone in the room, Mr. Wright. We did a lot of work with Jonathan Wright and his crew up at Village Hill here in Northampton. This was developed or completed, I believe, in 2015. We started design in 2014, so kind of a short time period. 12 homes meant to be, I said I wasn't going to say, but meant to be market rate. And I think the goal, and Jonathan can correct me if I'm wrong, was to sell them for about 500,000 each at that time, which, now that also seems like a bargain compared to some of the other condos that we see for sale. This is another Jonathan Wright project, which was meant to be more affordable housing by a private developer called Hinckley Trace. It's a little pocket development in the established Bay State neighborhood. I did get a lot of resistance at the time. People didn't want that many homes on this site. However, I also lived in Bay State for many, many years, and now if you are from Bay State, you know that there are some much larger homes being built there. So this is actually, I think, a petite development. There's 8 homes. I believe that the goal for the average price was around 350 to 400, and it's home ownership. It's duplexes, basically. I'm looking at Jonathan because I was having to make some guesses, and yeah. And the goal was to make those all net zero. So they're all have great solar orientation, well insulated, air sealed buildings. Before that was like a requirement by the code. That was just something that Jonathan and his team felt was very important. This is just a view of the median cost of a home by state. And Massachusetts, which I'm sure none of you can see the tiny print, is number 5 in the country for in terms of the expenses of homes. And from I believe it starts in 2000, where it's just under $250,000 for a single family home. And in 2022, it was about 650. And that's Massachusetts. So it's the red line. Yep. Yeah, right there. And that's just to provide perspective on us. And then another piece of perspective is the cost of living in Massachusetts. It's really expensive to live here. We have a great, I think, great quality of life here. Lots of arts and education in the state, and in particular here in Western Massachusetts. But it's like 100% higher than anywhere else in the country. And you know, so I will admit I use Google and AI a little bit for some data collection, but these are numbers that I've heard before. But to live comfortably, a single person, and whatever comfortable means, an annual salary of over $120,000, which I'm not one of those people. So, and I am a family of two, and yeah, so that's a lot of money. And a family of four requires 300,000. So because of that high cost of living, that is an impact on construction, obviously, because in order to pay the people who are doing the design work and doing the construction, we have to pay them so that they can live nearby, and help us produce this housing. And then there's the codes. So Alexis talks about sort of regulations over the money that they get, and how like EOLHC has lots of requirements. You take their money, they say you have to build it to this standard. Well, there are standards just in the state of Massachusetts, or across the country, the International Building Code. And then Massachusetts has its amendments. I'll talk about this in a minute, but there's 3 energy codes in Massachusetts. There's commercial code, there's residential code. Commercial code applies to multifamily projects. Residential code applies to 1 and 2 family projects. And then there's the fire codes, and if it's an existing building, it's a different code. So those look like nice, pretty covers of books, and they're each about this thick. And it's a lot. So there are, I mentioned 3 energy codes. We have the base code, which is the International Energy Code. Then we have the stretch code, which most communities in Massachusetts have adopted it. I think there's only a handful, maybe a dozen or a couple dozen communities that are at the base code. There are a few communities who have opted into the specialized energy code, which just knocks up the requirements a little bit higher. Northampton, Amherst, and East Hampton are 3 communities that are in the specialized op code. And that requires passive house certification for any multifamily project, which is a level of energy efficiency that is fantastic, but it's expensive to build homes that way. It can mean requirements for triple glazing. It has requirements for on-site energy production, no fossil fuels, really great insulation packages on the walls and roofs and floors. So it's intense, it's great, it's important, it's just expensive. It adds to the cost. So because Northampton is so green, and I just want to reiterate again, I am a resident here. Northampton opted into the fossil fuel free construction ordinance, which is, I think they are one of 10 communities in the state who are in this this group, and made a commitment that no new construction would use any kind of fossil fuels, which isn't really that much more than the opt-in stretch code, but it also applies to existing buildings. And that can be challenging with an existing building, especially if you're doing a major renovation and maybe there's a system there that has natural gas. So it adds another layer on. The whole point is to get off fossil fuels There are, I will say the city council did listen to feedback from the community, including myself and some other architects saying, listen, for existing buildings, you really want to maybe think about stepping this back a little bit because it will make renovating existing buildings more expensive than any other community. And so they did build in some exceptions, which was great. So thank you, city councilors, for listening to us, because one of the most important things we can do, or the most carbon neutral way that we can do development, is by renovating buildings. If you think about ripping down a building and putting all that waste into a landfill and then replacing that building with all this new structure, it's a lot more energy and carbon that we're dumping into the environment. So okay, so conclusion, why is it so expensive? The cost of living is high, the cost of construction is high, because the labor costs to pay these people living here is high. Material costs have skyrocketed. I think Alexis mentioned that. Since 2020, it's just gone off the rails. Some things have gone up 45%, which is ridiculous. And the tariffs have made the market volatile. That's a good word for it. Which has made everybody nervous, and that isn't really great for any type of cost estimating that's done. And you can't blame contractors. You're asking them to hold a price on something that they might be building in 3 to 6 months. And who knows what tariff could be put in place that could impact lumber or aluminum or steel. There's limited land to develop in the Northeast, and in our community. We have been fantastic about taking care of our natural resources, protecting them, wetlands, and putting land into preservation, which is great, but it does limit where we can build. So, you know, supply demand, cost of land is expensive. And limited workforce. There are a lot of tradespeople who are fantastic and have retired. I see 2 tradespeople here, Andrew, Crystal, and Jonathan. And there are not enough people coming into the trades. So again, the whole supply demand, obviously, if there are fewer plumbers and electricians and carpenters, they can raise their rates because they're in great demand. And then we talked about regulations, which require robust energy efficient buildings, and the regulations that Alexis talked about. So I will say, I did affordable housing for the first 10 years of my career, complete just affordable housing, and then came to Kuhn-Riddle and did a variety of housing. And one of the things that impressed me or shocked me maybe from going from affordable housing to market rate is that affordable housing is more expensive to build because all of these regulations and requirements to make nice homes, which is fantastic. But they tend to be bigger units than market rate units. Market rate units will be teeny tiny little studios with teeny tiny bathrooms and teeny tiny storage closets, whereas the regulations around affordable housing make sure that you have a place for to put your linens. Your linen, you have to have a linen closet. And that's not always a requirement in market rate. So how do we build more housing? I don't know the answer to that, but I do know that there are projections out there that we need almost 220,000 new units or additional units by 2035. So that is not far away.
Across the whole state.
Yes, across the state. I think it's 11,000 or
6,000.
okay. Yeah.
And then in Hampshire, I think it's in this part of Hampshire County, 3,000 units, I think, by 2035.
Yeah.
Yes. But it's a lot for
a lot.
Northampton and East Hampton and Amherst.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that's it from me.
So, thanks. I didn't get to do a quick introduction of Jeff Spiritos, but I will let him introduce himself. He, has been trying to get a project off the ground in Northampton for a while, so has a lot of information about sort of costs, but with a slightly different lens. So I'll turn it over to you, Jeff. Thanks and welcome.
Thank you, Carolyn. It's great to be here. Thank you for inviting me. Great to be here with the City Council and the Housing Partnership and you all, leaders in the industry as well. So raise your hand if you've heard of the 79 King Street project. So maybe it's half the folks in the room. And don't know if any of you have been to some of the sessions, the zoning. And we've been through three, 2 upzonings after we got the first original zoning approved, thanks to Carolyn and the planning and zoning council. If you go to the next slide, that'll just give a little background. So I'm definitely an outsider here. Maybe raise your hand if you think we're carpetbaggers or something, somebody who doesn't deserve to be here, but hopefully not, because we care a lot about the same things that Northampton does and the folks that live here do, which a progressive environment, one that cares about the environment and people and social equity and housing equity and climate change and the forests and just biking and all natural things. So that's what we've been trying to bring to 79 King Street with our partners. And so, but I'm a little older than everybody else on this panel and have been at this for a long time, 45 years, and spent 25 years with the international developer Hines, working mostly out of New York City, building, tall steel and concrete buildings out of, skyscrapers. And then my own firm 20 years ago, a little over 20 years ago, only housing, a lot of apartment buildings, condos, all in New York City, and one affordable housing project, 250 units downtown on Ludlow and Houston Street. And then for the past 10 years, really, and it's all due to my daughter, Erica, who's a civil and environmental engineer, discovered mass timber. And she's out in Portland, Oregon, living the dream out there because they're doing a lot of it out there, but we're trying to bring it to the East Coast. I think we're probably going to be short on time, and I'm going to try to go fast, so there's time for questions. Anyhow, you can see the background, and what I want to do is just use an example of our mixed income affordable housing project in New Haven, which is finished, about ready for occupancy. It's from 25% to 60% AMI. 20% of the units are for individuals or families experiencing homelessness, and 20% are for market rate. But it's all mass timber. It's all passive house. It's got an extensive solar panel array on the roof. It was tried to be, it's a LIHTC project, so Connecticut Housing Authority, you can see a lot of the funding sources there at the bottom and our partners. And so 69 units, 87,000 square feet, going to the punchline here, really. $30 million total cost, even after delays, change orders, et cetera. That comes to around $350 a square foot and $425,000 per unit. Here's the structure. It's a CLT honeycomb structure. Now, we tried to close July of 2021. Then the COVID and the bureaucracy of doing the LIHTC closing, postponed us a year, and we had cost increases due to that. Our cost, and I'll share this at the end, would have been a good bit less than that. So here's what a CLT honeycomb looks like. Our passive house is 2 times compartmentalization, 2 times better than, or 100% better than what FIAS requires. Our storage of carbon in the building is off the charts because we're only using mass timber above grade. Here's some of the completed units. Every 2 and 3 bedroom unit has a large balcony. And you see all the exposed CLT walls, cross-laminated timber, as well as the ceilings. The exterior walls are as well. And it's really very airtight. And we can keep going further. So this is a bit of the outside. Above on that is, we got a lot of indoor and outdoor amenity space in addition to the balconies. And then the stairs are all exposed mass timber. These are 2-hour fire stairs, right? But because the mass timber is structural, it doesn't have to be covered with sheetrock. And that's the same thing that goes for, all the apartments. So this is what we're trying to do at 79 King Street as well. This is another project that it didn't complete the slide, but it's 9 stories built with 4 people, 4 workers plus a crane in 27 days, a whole CLT honeycomb building. And this is London, England, back in 2009. It was one of the real seminal projects, Stadthouse. We go further, there's a ton of benefits that come along with building with mass timber. And, a lot of folks, most folks are building with sticks, right? I mean, I can't take anything away from that really, but first of all, we got to build with low carbon materials, not steel and concrete. Secondly, we can build the most durable buildings, most resilient, healthy, and natural if we do it with mass timber and expose that timber. And I'm not trying to take anything away from the great work that you all are doing. And I know some of you, we got a mass timber oriented town and area here. So these are some of the benefits. And the last slide that I think I'll show, or the next to last slide, is the cost of our project against stick frame. Now, this is 4 floors from the ground up, right? It's all mass timber. If we were building it in, this is type 5. If we needed a podium, which was steel or concrete, which we compared it against, we would have this comparison. Overall, we were $8 a square foot, or 8% higher than a stick frame project. And our expectation as well at 79 King Street is we can build it for about the same cost that we could build a steel or concrete podium with stick frame above. Now if we can go to the next slide, and I'm going to finish with this really, we were at 70 units originally, you'll remember, in 2021. Then we went to 82 units thanks to adding the 6th floor and going to more units. And then we went to 120 units to reduce the size, get more flexibility, try to right size the rents. But the big existential things that are going on is interest rates are way up. You guys have all talked about it. Construction costs are way up. Uncertainty is way up. Banks haven't been lending. It's just been very hard to make it work. So even though we think we could build it fairly inexpensively, and we've looked at stick frame as well, just in that environment, as our other, Alan has said, and Alexis has said, it's just really challenging. Now, we've looked at this both completely market rate and mixed income rate. We've looked at it with an affordable housing developer from Boston who really dug deeply in order to make it work with us as a partner. It's just been a real struggle to make it work. We're in the downtown core area. It's a narrow site, but that's just a detail of it. It's just really these days, it's hard to make the numbers work. I can go on and on, but I think let's have some questions. Because how to make it work? I mean, I think we got to devote a lot of dialogue to that.
Thank you. So I'm going to stop screen share. I can go back if someone wants to go back to a slide. But then I think it probably makes sense to just open it up for questions, maybe in the room first, and then if
back
they're
and forth.
yeah, back and forth. And if you want to run that to determine who's next, that's fine. And I can, allow the online in.
Great, thank you. Thanks to everybody who spoke tonight and all the information. So I'll open up to questions. Does anybody in the room have a question? Could you just say your name and where you're from? No, right. Thank
Helen
you.
Tajurian. I live in Sunderland, Massachusetts. My question is, earlier you mentioned type 5. Would you be able to clarify what this means and what that entails?
Type 5 is the simplest form of construction that you can use in buildings. So it's a stick frame requirement. It works with 4/1, 5/1, 5/2, That's so 5 stories over 1 over 2, or 4 stories of stick frame, that's studs.
Excuse me one second. They can't hear on Zoom. Oh,
Oh, I'm sorry about that. So there are different construction types that dictate the fire and structural and occupancy requirements. So type 5 is what most stick frame or light frame buildings are built with if they're under 8 stories. And 5 stories over 2 stories of a type 1 podium, which is more fire resistive with steel and concrete, is the maximum you can build in type 5 construction.
it doesn't look like anybody's on Zoom, so.
Question. Oh, Linda Tullio from William Street. Is the project on hold then on King
Could you
Street?
state your name and where you're from, please?
Yes, I just did that, didn't I? Linda Tullio, William Street. Is the project on hold then? The one on,
79 King. You're
Yeah.
saying, well, it's for 4 years, it's been trying to get through the rest of design and into construction, and we're still trying to do that. Are we actively working on it? The answer is yes. So on hold, and it's a really good question. On hold could mean nothing's happening and we've just sitting on it because we're holding the land. By the way, we do own the property, for those that don't know. Or we could actively be trying to solve the issues and move it forward. That's what we're doing.
thank you.
Jeremy on Zoom?
Thanks. Yeah. Hi, I'm Jeremy Dubbs. I'm the Ward 4 City Councilor and a member of the Community Resources Committee. I really appreciate the presentations and really think it was very informative and helpful. My question is mainly about accessibility, and also I might have like a few comments also about accessibility in Northampton. And so just to introduce myself to some people who don't know me, I'm a wheelchair user. I wanted to be on the council to be sort of a voice for disabled people in Northampton. And one thing I talk about a lot is that there are apartment complexes in Northampton are very much the only there are very limited options in Northampton for wheelchair users and people with mobility issues, especially people who need a ground level entrance and exit to get in and out of their home. And so it often, because of the limited options, disabled people often end up living in the apartment complexes in Northampton. And you know, and so I've lived in an apartment complex now for 15 years, and the rent continues to go up every year, and so it becomes less and less affordable. And so yeah, so I would, it's very a passion of mine to see more affordable and accessible housing in Northampton. And so I guess leads me to, I have just a multi-part question that I have, which is that so I'm curious about when apartment complexes are built, affordable housing is built in apartments. Curious about the actual apartments, like the units themselves, and are they all built to be accessible, or does a person have to request an accessible apartment, or is there limited accessible housing in those apartment complexes? And because personally, like I can say on a personal level, like my building that I live in has a ground level entrance and exit for me, but the actual unit that I live in isn't very accessible for a disabled person. So I just kind of have to live with that, you know. And so I'm curious like about how many units are accessible, and also, and then so another thought that I have a lot about housing in Northampton is that I would love to see more accessible houses in Northampton because it's so hard to find a house that's affordable and accessible. And renovations for a house, to make a house that's already built, to renovate it to become accessible for a wheelchair user is so expensive. I know one constituent on South Street who renovated their house to make it accessible, and it cost so much money, thousands and thousands of dollars. So I'm curious about how often do we consider accessibility before we build a house? is it only based on request? Like, is it only if you know a person that has a disability is going to live here? Is that only when we make a house accessible? Or is it possible that we could have more housing with ground level entrances and accessibility that, that somebody didn't request, that's just already going to exist, so that somebody who wants to move to Northampton that's disabled could have those options available already. So, oh wow, there's an accessible house that I could move into. That's incredible, because right now so few of them exist, and so I'm just curious in general about that. Thank you.
So I can start this, and I think Alon probably has some thoughts too. So as an affordable housing developer using state or federal money, we're required to have a certain percentage of all of the units that we build in a development as fully accessible. So every unit has to be visitable, but certain units do have to be fully accessible. And when they are, we have sound and sight accessibility, we have mobility accessibility, and then we have visitability. And they're all like layered standards that we have to take into consideration. Fun fact about affordable housing is that we actually can't put all the accessible units on the ground floor because that's viewed as a fair housing violation, which is super fun for us when an elevator goes out. Even less so fun for people living in the buildings. But that is how it works. So I also want to just mention, I hope people know, but there is a program run through the state called the Home Modification Loan Program that provides up to $50,000 zero interest loans to modify your home if you are disabled or elderly. So we don't administer Northampton, Wayfinders does, but we administer the rest of Hampshire County and Hampden County. Wayfinders office is on Pleasant Street, right across from Catalpa Coffee. You can go in there and talk to them about it. Just in case people didn't know about that. It's a really great program, and it's you can go up to 120% of area median income to qualify for loan. Anyhow, so on the subsidized affordable housing, yes, apartments have to be accessible. We tend to try to exceed the minimum requirement because a lot of folks that end up living in our units have mobility challenges. And I bet Alon can talk more about design standard.
Yeah. So you're probably familiar with the regulations, the building code regulation, CMR 521 something, but it's the Massachusetts Architectural Access Board has a whole series of regulations that we have to follow, whether we're working on a renovation or new construction. There are triggers in terms of renovations that will require us to upgrade the entire building to become accessible if a certain amount of money or a certain amount of the building is modified. Then we will go into an older building. We'll figure out how to create an accessible entry. We'll put in an elevator. We'll change all the door hardware. We'll make sure that there's proper signage so somebody who's visually impaired has Braille accessible to them. So there's a whole bunch of regulations that we look at for both new and existing buildings. And in housing, when you build new housing over 11 units, that triggers a whole bunch of accessibility requirements. The number of accessible units is dependent on the number of units being built. In terms of private development, and what I will say is multifamily, whether it's a private developer or an affordable sort of public development, you still have to adhere to those regulations, the accessibility regulations. In terms of single family homes, it is dependent on the individual. Someone building their own home can do whatever they want as long as it meets the building code. They don't have to meet accessibility requirements. That said, a lot of people, when they are building a home, what I will say is the people who can afford to build new homes tend to be older people who are thinking about aging in place. And so they are looking at those accessibility requirements. That's what I'm seeing right now in terms of people who are building single family homes. We do a lot of over 55 housing as well. And so that obviously we're thinking about how to make the entire unit accessible. They tend to be just single level living. So accessibility is definitely part of our everyday process. It's another one of those books that I showed. I didn't share that one, but that Massachusetts is actually pretty good in terms of requiring accessibility. I hope that answers the question.
Wonderful. Yeah, thank you very much.
Lori, yeah, we're in a different space today, so I didn't put out a sign up sheet, so just raise your hand in between.
Should I?
So Lori, yeah.
Laurie Loizal, I live in Ward 3, and I have two questions. The first question is for Carolyn. You said the study said that supply is below demand, which is what I've heard a lot. But then I hear like places like the William Street development that happened near Hockenham is not selling. So I'd kind of like to know why that is, you know, like, or maybe it's not true, but that's what I keep hearing everywhere I go. It's not selling. And then the second question is for anybody who wants to talk about the idea of requiring development to include a certain percentage of affordable, like they do in Portland, Maine, and other cities. I think it's called inclusionary zoning. What people think about that idea.
So I can answer both of those, and maybe the second one, we can obviously open it up to other people's commentary on that. But in terms of so in terms of supply and demand, yes, we know there's far more demand for housing than there is out there. And you know, even from the affordability side as well as market rate side, Valley has the numbers for the people who are applying to get into their units, and it's just off the charts compared to the units that are available. But we have this issue where, you know, there isn't enough housing across the entire spectrum. So people who can afford much higher cost or higher end housing don't have the same choice. So they are competing with other people who maybe are at lower incomes and can't afford those units. So everyone's sort of scrambling for the same units. And of course, so if you don't have units at each level, then it really affects the whole pool. I can't answer about the specifics about 107. I mean, I think there just may be some details about the units that maybe someone doesn't like, or maybe it's just harder to sell because, you know, those are smaller units and they were intended, they meet the criteria in our zoning for what we were trying to achieve and encouraging the construction of smaller units so they could be more attainable to people who are at more modest income. And so they're coming on the market at $400,000, $500,000 a unit, which is much lower than the single family detached units that are coming on the market. But again, I don't have the details about what's going on internally in that. In terms of inclusionary housing, we have we don't have a mandatory inclusionary housing requirement across the board. There are some there are specific instances in which we require or we have incentives for affordable housing, or we in the subdivision rules, for example, if you're asking for a waiver from some of the subdivision rules, the applicant will have to provide some affordable housing to offset that, or to mitigate for the fact that they're asking for a waiver from one of the subdivision rules, which subdivisions are the construction of new streets. And so we haven't had a lot of those in Northampton recently. But I will say that it's much harder in Western Mass to incorporate mandatory inclusionary housing requirements because, as you've heard today, the cost is the same or higher when you're building affordable housing. And those costs have to be borne by somebody. So affordable housing, as you saw, has only public subsidy to build. Market rate housing is the costs are borne by the buyer. So if you have a mixed income where you're requiring a private sector developer to build, the cost is the same. You're spreading out that cost again to the market rate buyers. So the market rate buyers are then subsidizing the costs of construction for the affordable units. And the reason why I say it's harder in Western Mass is the total number of units you're building is smaller. So you have smaller development scale to spread that cost across. And the market threshold for being able to rent or buy those is lower than you might have in Eastern Mass. So in Eastern Mass, if you have a 500 unit project and you're required to do 10 units or even 25 units, that cost for 500 can be distributed much farther. It's also very complicated, as Alexis noted, to not just build the affordable housing, but then there's a whole tail end where you have to maintain that for 99 years. And unless you're a nonprofit affordable housing developer, it's very hard to manage that kind of system where you have to run the lotteries, you have to ensure that the next buyer or the next tenant is meeting all the income eligibility requirements. And so putting that on someone who, like a private or market rate developer, is a burden that is not in the realm of expertise typically of that person. So it's a very complicated setup. So that's what I would say about that. And I don't know if anybody else has any.
On Zoom, Alex Jarrett.
Hello, I'm Alex Jarrett. I'm the Ward 5 City Councilor. I was going to ask about inclusionary zoning, so thanks for speaking to that. My other question is about what can we do to reduce costs on the city end? I'm hearing about things such as a streamlined permitting process, pre-approved construction plans, a predictable permit process, and meaning you know whether it's going to be approved if you follow certain rules and don't have to go before the planning board. For example, that's something we recently changed, was if you are a single family and you're adding another unit, detached unit on the property, you no longer have to go through the planning board for approval. So hopefully that will streamline. But are there other things that I would love to hear both from Carolyn Mish and from the developers is what would be helpful for you so that this process can go faster, and going faster means costing less?
Can I get started with this, if you don't mind? Because so we're involved in knowledgeable of a lot of projects all over the country, in Boston, outside of Washington, D.C., in Montgomery County, in New York City. We wrote the mass timber feasibility report for the city of New York for a 500-unit complex in Staten Island. And I'm involved nationally and internationally, really, in advocacy for mass timber and low carbon buildings. So I really have a lot of data on what policies, what incentives, what requirements there are for projects and what different municipalities and state governments are doing. So everything from inclusionary, where the markets can support it, and real estate tax reductions over longer periods of time. I mean, from a zoning standpoint, I hope I don't get in trouble for this, but I think the Northampton zoning and planning board and everybody involved in it is really receptive to making developers as welcome as possible in their zoning approval process. I'll just say that, you know, if you can provide real estate tax benefits or breaks, if you can provide the Community Preservation Act benefits, not only for affordable housing, but expand that. If somehow there can be incentives for low carbon housing, for more housing production, lower cost financing is something that Montgomery County and Cambridge and Somerville are doing through state housing bond funds. There's another affordable housing effort, an innovation fund that Iowa State Housing Authority is doing, where you don't have to go through the QAP if you win a Shark Tank type QAP award for your innovative project, you automatically get your tax tax credits up to $1 million a year. There's a lot of ways to do this, a lot of ways to spend some time on this, but they all come to reducing the overall construction and development costs, which is absolutely critical to getting the real shortfall of housing, of both affordable and market rate, addressed. I hope that was somehow helpful.
Anybody else? Okay, thank you. So now we'll go to somebody in the room. Question? And, yeah, just wherever the microphone is.
My name's Michael Bartlett. I'm from Hatfield. I'm the longest serving CPA member. What's a reasonable ask for a developer per unit for a grant from the CPA?
What a fun question. I used to chair CPA when I lived in East Hampton, so fellow CPA here. Oh, goodness. I don't know. Carolyn, do you have a?
Well,
Yeah.
you know, there isn't a blanket number, I guess I would say. It really depends on the project. How many, you know, what's the project unit count? Are all the units affordable? You know, it varies. In Northampton, the CPC has given, you know, $1 million, but that's spread across 60. Yeah, and CDBG money. So it was about 700,000 CPC funds. And that's for 60 units. On the other hand, you know, when the CPC has also given $50,000 a unit to Habitat for individual single family homes. So it really depends on the project and the need and the pro formas and sort of where the other matches are coming from.
Okay.
So.
And my next question is there anywhere I can get a template of a successful 40B comprehensive permit application? Through you? Okay.
Yes. Go to our website. You can find my email on there and just reach out, or Carolyn can connect you with me.
Perfect. Thank you.
Next on Zoom is Meg Robbins.
Hi, thank you. Meg Robbins, Aldrich Street, Northampton. I too had wanted to ask about the 20% affordability factor, and I'm grateful for the questions and the responses that we got earlier. And I wonder if there are other builders present who might want to talk about it or react to it. We heard that some of the conditions that the city might have to make in order to make that a possibility. Are there other conditions that would help open that up? And I'm talking as well about what happens after the building is erected. And one of the conditions that we run into in the city is that subsidies, state subsidies and federal subsidies for renters often do not include the prices that a lot of these new buildings or new apartments are going to go for, which is understandable and very sad. But is there a way that in thinking about, or maybe thinking beyond the 20% affordability, that would work for builders to think about working with those vouchers in mind? Because we have a big backlog, for example, of Section 8 vouchers, but we don't have rentals that will accept them. What would make it possible for builders to be more open to that?
So I don't know that I have like a fully comprehensive answer to you. What we are not a market rate developer, but what I have heard from market rate developers, and the market rate developers in the room can correct me, is that the what a Section 8 or a mobile Massachusetts, or rather a Massachusetts rental voucher, the maximum rent they will pay, if you're building market rate housing, it doesn't make your project pencil out. So the reason it works for us is because everything's subsidized and we're required to build in what the maximum rents covered by Section 8 or MRVPs would be into our pro forma. So our operating budget, once it's under construction and people have moved in, we're looking at how many of those units would be covered by a Section 8. And that's like our baseline. We have to make the numbers work with that. If you're building market rate, you don't have those subsidies. So and the subsidies in Western Mass aren't particularly lined up with what it actually costs. So to make your deal pencil out, if you're doing market rate, you have to charge more. That's all new construction. With old construction and people that are long-term landlords, why they're not taking Section 8s, I don't totally have an answer for that. Greed. I don't know. People being terrible. Do you have?
I don't have an answer for that, and I can't say because I'm not on that end of it. We're just asked to design things and help get them built. But I think market rate developers are developing properties to make a profit. They're for-profit developers, and I know that they can sometimes have a bad name because they're these big developers and they're making millions of dollars. It is hard to build housing in Western Massachusetts and throughout Massachusetts. So my experience with private developers is they're not out to gouge people, but they are there to make a profit. We are a capitalist country, and if the market bears having someone paying the full price versus the complexity of Section 8 vouchers, I imagine if they're not required to do it, they won't do it.
I mean, I think that's certainly my experience as well. So what we're trying to do, for example, in our Dixwell project, where 20% of the units have vouchers, right? And for either individuals, couples, or families experiencing homelessness, we're really trying to, through an educational program and the supportive services that are on site, really just be able to provide the same quality housing, the same respect, the same integration with the remainder of the the community that lives there, including the market rate folks. And this is no small challenge, obviously, because there's a whole lot of reasons why some folks are Section 8 renters, but everybody has a right to safe, healthy housing. And really, social housing in Europe is the model, right? Everybody lives the same way under one roof, and they are very proud of the architecture and the services and the housing accessibility and all that stuff and buildability that and I'll just say climate consciousness that they deliver. And we're not so good at that over here, actually. And especially in times where we may be led by folks who are more capitalistic and less, let's just say, equality prone and open-minded, than other times. I mean, we end up going backwards. So I just would say it's hard to build a whole building. Subsidized housing, of course, it's being built for housing for homeless populations. It's being built all over New York City through organizations that are set up with that, with services inside those projects. I think, Ellen, you talked about one of your projects that way as well. I'm going on and on, but I just think we have a duty really to try to address that issue so that we provide good housing for everybody. And we got a long way to go.
Okay, so this is probably more of a question for Carolyn, and I'm interested in knowing how helpful the Affordable Homes Care Act has been in the city of Northampton. That's one question. And then the next question is recently, the governor of Massachusetts said that she was removing some requirements that she felt would enable cities and towns and builders and developers to build more housing more easily. So I'm wondering if you have any thoughts on that.
Thanks, Gwen. So actually that sort of ties back into what Councilor Jared, I think, was asking, is what things can be done to sort of facilitate development. And I think that's what the governor's office is trying to do. However, that's more at the statewide regulatory level. So the Wetlands Protection Act, other environmental regs that and processes that are layered onto that permitting approach. So I think and what's interesting that when proposals come out of the state, the legislature or the governor's office about expediting permits or modifying the way we review things in Northampton, an expedited permit goes through in about 2.5, 3 months, or that's a standard permit. And they're talking about reducing the permit time in the Boston region from 8 months to 6 months. And so it's just on a completely different scale. So typically when we hear things coming out of Boston saying, we're going to streamline this stuff so that it doesn't take you 6 months to get your permit. And we're like, okay, thanks. So however, there are things that, and I think Councilor Jared alluded to, are there ways that we can set up, and we've started to do this in the zoning, where we're very specific about, the community has said, what do we want out of development? How do we want it to look? And so that has been baked into some of the zoning ordinances the city council has passed in the last several years, or design standards, or the way buildings are oriented. And yet there's still a permit review from the planning board, even though there's very specific criteria that the community has participated in crafting for the city council to adopt. And so I think, that still adds to 2.5 to 3 months for an applicant and a level of uncertainty, even though the zoning is very specific. So I think there are ways that in Northampton, even though we're miles ahead of what's happening in Eastern Mass, that we can do to, pull down some of those time impediments. And as you saw on the slides, time is money. So there's that piece. And then the other one about the Affordable Homes Act, a lot of that was about funding and creating more money to put in pots for different types of housing. And so we don't see that directly, but those are accessed by affordable housing developers, or they're, restructuring tax credits or things like that. So yes, it's helpful, but the city doesn't directly see that. So.
There's somebody on Zoom that I go to. Safara?
Thank you so much. This was so informative. I'm someone who's lived in Florence now for just about 7 years. And I recently had a friend of mine who is part of the invisible disabilities community. And she had a really, really, really hard time finding housing, had a voucher, people wouldn't accept her voucher. And to the point that she had to stay in a hotel for a few days. And thankfully, through a friend, found a place to live who also has a disability. But one of the things that I wanted to ask was, are there considerations made for environmental considerations in the spaces? I know we were talking about accessibility as far as physical space, but one of the issues and problems that she has is that, and I do too, is that I need spaces that have environmental standards that can address my needs. And it's concerning when you're on the affordable housing list, but you don't know who your neighbor's going to be, or you don't know what the environment will support for you, and you can't control those things. Those are not within your control. But if new units are being developed with that idea, and also I know a number of single women who are looking for housing and always looking for housing, and some kind of community-based housing structure where we can be supportive for each other. We can be, neighbors and support systems where there can also be community spaces that could be housed for supporting with, bringing in, food, or like exchanging things like that, where specific for single women or single men, or, just to be in a community. Is that something that's also thought about in the housing planning? Thanks so much.
In terms of sort of thinking about healthy building, that is something that we're very much focused on now. Not just about energy efficiency, but making sure that the air quality in the building is excellent. We seal the buildings up really, really tight now for energy efficiency. So we want to make sure that there's enough fresh air coming in, and that fresh air is clean. So there's, which all of this adds to the cost of construction, to have these intense mechanical systems that are making sure that we have clean, healthy air. But also thinking consciously about the materials that we use. So healthy materials, things that don't off gas, making sure that, we've a long time been getting away from asbestos, of course, and taking it out of buildings when we're going into old buildings. But we're much more conscious, throughout my career over the last 30 years, about the materials that we use and how that impacts people. And I think we also think about that when, in particular, when we're working on affordable housing, that there are some requirements in terms of what materials you can use, whether or not you can use carpet. Carpet is a nice place to hold allergens. So yes, we as designers and as developers, always thinking about how to create spaces that are healthy for people to live in. In terms of sort of neighborhoods for groups of people, in general, housing can't, exclude people. So when you create housing for a group of people, are you potentially excluding a group of people? But there are many groups that gather together and do what's called co-housing. You may have heard of that. There's one or two developments here in Northampton. There's one in Amherst. There's actually a well-known co-housing designer, Mary Krause, in Amherst. And so if you have a group that wants to build a specific type of housing, they're a great group of designers that can help you with that. I don't know that in the affordable housing realm that you can do that, but there are options on the private side.
So I'm gonna second first. So there was actually a really cool article in the New York Times recently about a bunch of single women who bought mobile homes. I think it was in Texas. You should read it. It was very sweet. And if I ever get divorced, that's what I'm going to do. And your first question about environmental safety. So yes, to what Alon said, there's like pretty rigorous standards around off-gassing, particularly when we're doing passive house design, which we have to do in Northampton. The challenge on our end comes in on when people are living there. So all of our new buildings, not all of our old buildings, but all of our new buildings are non-smoking. That includes anything that one might want to smoke. We've run into challenges, particularly with laundry rooms, that we cannot dictate what people use to wash their clothes. And when you're in a shared space, we have a lot of headbutting with residents around what people are using to wash their clothes. And it becomes a property management issue. It becomes a tenant tension issue. But we can't tell people they can't use Tide. So there is that to consider when you're living in an apartment building with other people. You have to deal with other people's things. And it can be great when there's, you know, wonderful community happening, and it can be a real point of tension. So there's only so much we can control on that side of things.
Good. Jonathan,
Do I have to push something here?
you're good, as long as
Okay,
green lights.
Jonathan Wright. I live in Northampton. It's a great conversation. If I could just a couple of things. One is the mass timber has a number of really striking attributes, and one of them is the healthy materials. There's no sheetrock, there's no paint, and it's a kind of one and done. So something to look at. To come to your question, you're still on the screen about shared spaces or meeting spaces. Those have to be funded, and a co-housing developer has a real challenge if you're building over a period of years. When does that common space get built, and how is it paid for? Because its value has to be assigned per stirpe to the units, and in many cases it's not there, so it's not financeable. So there's some really commonly owned spaces are really tricky. I just wanted to come back to the money side, because what I think I'm hearing is that between what Alexis and your folks need, you know, the development cost and the market rate, there's about $200,000 a unit more to do affordable housing, something like that. I think that maybe it's more than that. And I think if you look at your buckets at the beginning, it's in the tax credits. There are not enough of them. They are bloody hard to get. You go back and back, you look at the lead time, a market rate project, you can get your permits in 3 months, maybe you get financed. You can be under construction in 6 to 9 months. You can build in a year or 18 months, or whatever it is. So these 3, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 year development timelines are adding enormously to the cost. Those tax credits are a federal subsidy, and they're going to go dark here. I mean, you know, we need to understand, we would like them to be 3 times what they are, but they're part of a federal tax program that is vulnerable. So, yeah, so I just wanted to, I wanted to see if we can focus on the burden that is embedded in the major source, the largest source of funding for affordable housing, which is the tax credits, in their availability and their complexity. You mentioned 7 different attorneys. Yeah, all of that, right?
I'm going to look at Lionel too, to see if you have anything to consider to add. So Jonathan, I don't want to contradict you, but what I have heard, and I sit on a whole bunch of different policy committees and talk to people federally and state, is that particularly the federal tax credit program is not in danger. There was a lot of like hand wringing. I mean, I wring my hands constantly, but not about the federal LIHTC program. I think it's relatively safe because it is a way for really wealthy people to wash their, oh yeah, absolutely. But I don't think it's going to disappear. And there is in the Affordable Homes Act, and there was an increase in the bond cap for 4% tax credits and 9% tax credits. 4%. I don't understand the complexity of those 2 distinct buckets. I know that we often, like if we're wanting to do recapitalization of old projects, we were typically looking at 4% tax credits. Those are far and few between right now. 9% tax credits are generally readily available, and still we can only apply once a year, and we're competing against everybody in the state. That's all I have to say about that. Sorry.
But it is the largest source of money, and it's the biggest time consumer in your horizon, and it's contributing $200,000 to the.
And, you know, this is a serious issue because it's administered by the bureaucracy, HUD, for example. 40 to 60,000 units across the country a year are funded through LIHTC. That varies. Maybe that's 10% or so of all the affordable housing, all the multifamily units that are built every year. It's way too low. If you share that across 50 states, we should be creating 1 million units a year or hundreds of thousands of units of tax credit homes, right? And so to have that artificial cap, even with the increase in the 4% bond money, which really is not subject to the same criteria that the 9% money is. So it's going to increase the amount of housing that's available. It's just, it's both the bureaucracy, like you're talking about, and the shortfall of total capital available for LIHTC projects is just woefully too little to try to make any kind of dent in this incredible housing shortfall that's, it's 7 million homes, right, across the country, 7.3 million homes, according to the NLIHC or Joint Center for Housing Studies. They know this stuff. So anyhow, over to others.
Okay. Yeah, yeah, the last questions.
Well, I think Mr. Wright kind of had my question, which was about waxing and waning of tax credits and federal stuff, but more to what Councilor Jarrett was saying, what can we do as a council, as in a city, to help advocate on a larger level for increasing these tax credits and funding? I think that's all I want.
So I think we've been clear that I'm going to speak for myself. Northampton is a great place to develop. I feel like affordable housing and market rate is welcome. I feel like, as Carolyn mentioned, permitting is relatively clear and relatively smooth sailing. We can certainly get derailed by abutters who want to sue us, and it happens. I think a critical piece is to show up at the state. So I testified in front of the Joint Senate and House Housing Committee last week about the YIMBY bill. People who are private citizens speak up in favor of affordable housing. Municipal folks who have an ear to the state leaders, talk to them about what I think in particular. I'm going to echo Senator Comerford a little bit. Like, Western Mass needs their fair share. We routinely do not get the same amount as Boston, even when you look at it per capita. I feel like the tides are starting to turn because the Western Mass delegation is really strong and they really champion affordable housing and housing writ large. But we need everybody here. Amazing. So keep doing this and being engaged and show up and talk to state leaders about why building housing in Western Mass in particular is critical. We are losing population. We do not want that to happen. And one of the critical ways of making that happen is to make it affordable to live here. Western Mass is open for business. We are open for housing development. And yeah, just keep shouting that from the rooftops.
I want to echo what Alexis is saying. It's really great to see all of you here and know that you care about housing and about our community, because it's not just about getting people in homes, it's about keeping people here. We are an incredible valley full of excellent education institutions, and so many young people leave because they can't afford to live here. As a business owner, it is sometimes hard to get people to come here and work for us because they can't afford to live here. Had an experience with one of my employees coming from Boston, selling a condo in North Boston, couldn't find a home to live here. It took her 9 months to get here. She just decided, I'm just going to rent. Thank God you're coming. But it's a real challenge for many business owners, is to get professionals to stay here, and we build this wealth of knowledge and see it trickle away. And yeah, so show up, keep showing up. Thank you for showing up.
Can I add some specific things in response to your question as well? Is this on? Yes. Okay, great. Thanks. So again, the state can support a housing bond fund that would go from the start of site plan approval that the developer would be required to comply with, all the way through 30 years of, let's just say 25 years of permanent financing for 3 or 4%, if that developer, affordable housing, some component, whatever, and these exist, would meet the criteria that that bond fund requires. 3%, 4%, 30-year construction and permanent financing. The Housing Opportunities Commission of Montgomery County has that program, and hundreds of thousands of units are being built as a result of that. I'll just say tens of thousands, because hundreds of thousands is what they're set up to do, but it's not done yet. There's a strong affordability criteria, not affordability, strong climate requirement for that. Passive House or Energy Star, consider mass timber, et cetera. The other thing is we really got to get the states to support workforce housing with more funding, and also support and pay for reduced or no real estate taxes for a long enough period of time for the project to get itself out of the ground, get pencil out, and be able to go forward and stabilize itself. And, you know, that's hard for a local community like Northampton to want to do, that needs money for schools and roads and other programs that it believes so strongly in. So maybe the state needs to provide it and other states need to fund it. But I think that's another effort that, because of what Alexis is saying, we could lobby for at the state.
It's 6:37. We're supposed to end at 6:30. So I want to thank Dr. Ricamish for organizing this, and for everybody who spoke today for coming, and for Gwen for supporting this. So thank you.
I just want to thank everybody for being here tonight, and thank the Planning and Sustainability Department and everybody who could come tonight. And this is going to be a live and ongoing conversation. So thank you.
Wait a second. We need a motion to adjourn.
I'll make the
Second.
motion. Sorry.
I'll move to adjourn.
Here, yes.
Yes.
Yeah. Just make sure